Lucy, I'm just going to quickly log out and back in case so I can try and get my camera to work.
Yeah, that's fine. We've just gone live, but all you'll miss is the introductions. Thanks, Laura.
Thanks.
Good evening, it's 1 minute past 6 and I'd like to welcome you all to the meeting of the Lower Thames Crossing Task Force. Originally scheduled for the 19th September, this meeting was postponed due to the sad passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II and reconvened for this evening, Monday the 17th of October 2022. Please be aware that the meeting is being recorded and the recording will be made available on the Council's website and YouTube channel. Going in for apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Yeah, we've got apologies from Councillor Salmons and Wesley Mercer, the Thurrock Business Board rep.
Thank you. Moving on to the minutes of the last meeting, I move that the minutes of the Lower Thames Crossing Task Force meeting held on the 20th of June 2022 be approved as a correct record. Are there any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? Move those minutes be approved. I can't see anyone to the contrary. Urgent items of business. I have not agreed to any items of urgent business this evening. And moving on to number 4 on the agenda, declarations of interest. Does anyone wish to declare a declaration of interest? That's no's all around the room. Okay, so this evening we have with us Mr. Tim Wright, who's Head of Consents at National Highways, and he's going to be delivering a presentation to us, which we've allowed 1 hour approximately for this, but if Tim's happy, we can extend that a little bit longer, maybe, with questions. All of the members of the task force have seen the presentation, so thank you very much for circulating that. So we'll have the weekend to have a look at it. So if you want to go through it at a fair pace, that's absolutely fine for us. And I'd like to hand over now to Tim for his presentation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Massey, and thanks for inviting me here to talk to you all. I was racking my brains. I think it was about 2018 that I last came along in person. Obviously seen you online since then, but it's a pleasure to be here in person again to talk to you about where we are with the scheme. I was asked to come along and talk through some changes and where we are on the engagement with Thurrock Council, so that is what's in the presentation. And since you have had advance, I won't go through it in a hugely detailed point by point, but obviously I'm open to any questions about the presentation or any other matters that you want to raise with me, and I'll answer questions for you as you desire.
Thank you for that. Just before, what I'd like to do with the consent of the task force is allow Tim to do his presentation in full, and we'll save questions for the end.
Thank you. Okay, so if we can have the next slide, please, as they say. So we're going to cover a summary of the changes in the last year. I don't believe we did come and talk to you about local refinement consultation. So some of these changes are the ones that we represented at local refinement consultation that we'll be setting out. We'll talk about the current engagement and then the programme to submission and beyond. Next slide, please. Changes. Next slide. So we've made a number of changes. The most significant one, I think, probably people will know a lot about this, is changes to the proposals that we've made down on the shoreline. We were proposing some environmental mitigation. That sat in the orange area, and that was set out at the community impacts consultation back last year. Now, clearly, after that consultation and running towards the end of the year, the Thames Freeport was designated. And we recognise the real importance of Thames Freeport for the growth of the whole Thames estuary region. And what we found was that the area in orange where we were proposing permanent environmental mitigation is actually a site that is of particular importance to the Thames Freeport. It takes up frontage on the water, and for obvious reasons that's very important to a port. So we've had very close conversations with Thames Freeport and also with Thurrock Council officers to work out what we do in this area. This was quite a substantial change that we made, where we took away the environmental mitigation that we were proposing in the orange area and moved it to the area that is now the purple with hatching marked as number 7. That's called Tilbury Fields. It'll be an open space area of landscaping that'll be available for the public to walk around in, and we'll talk a little bit more about access routes across that shortly later on. In addition, we changed the configuration of the operational access in this area. So at the community impacts consultation, we did provide access to the tunnel building. It came down roads that ran alongside the scheme connecting onto Station Road. That has changed, and we're providing what you'll see as a rather more substantial offering there. Now, that's there in order to provide operational ability so that we can turn around traffic at the tunnel in the event of incidents. There's a bridge over the crossing, over the Lower Thames crossing at that point. But as we designed that, we also had conversations with the council and with the port, and are minded to what might be brought forward in the future by Thames Freeport. So we are minded to create an operational access that can be repurposed at a future date, should that be brought forward by as a separate connection, potentially the Tilbury Link Road, which, as you know, is a RIS 3 project. That would be delivered through a separate consenting regime, but we've put those roads in so that as that gets brought forward, it doesn't require substantial change to our scheme at this location. So I hope you see that as a beneficial delivery of support which creates the potential for the future of Thames Freeport in the region. Next slide, please. That gives us a graphical view of the entrance approach looking south. What you can particularly see there is how the environmental mitigation land hugs down the side of the scheme. You can see the type of landscape that will be creating there. It's still environmental mitigation, so it's designed to create specific habitats that mitigate for some of the impacts that we are having with the scheme. And the landscaping is designed to create a pleasant environment and to create views and to sit within the nature of the landscape in the area. Next slide. Another substantial change that we made at the local refinement consultation is the new link road from Orsett-Cock Junction to the southbound A1089. At the moment on the road network, you can come direct from the A13 onto the A1089. But until we made this change, you would not have been able to get from Orsett-Cock roundabout to the A1089, which you can currently do. We are now switching round that connection so that you'll be able to get from Orsett-Cock roundabout onto the A1089. And if you want to get from the A13 to the A1089, you'll come off at Orsett-Cock roundabout and then follow the road round through to that. The reason we've made this change is because we found in the latest traffic modelling that there was a larger amount of traffic that was coming off at Orsett-Cock, wanting to get down into Grays and Tilbury area, and it was coming down the A1013 and coming through urban communities, and that wasn't appropriate. We wanted to keep that traffic onto a road network that's designed to support that type of traffic flow. So this change is designed to make sure that we don't put traffic down on the local road network that we shouldn't be putting there. That's the reason. Next slide. That was a sort of description in words about how it shows this hopefully is something, and as you've all seen the slides, perhaps you can digest for yourselves about how that traffic flow works. But that gives an indication of where the flow goes now. We've also proposed some landscaping around the A1089 junction. This was not new areas of land. This was always proposed to be in the scheme. But we are now doing some landforming in that. That has some benefits. It creates some bunding to reduce the visual impact, reduce the noise impact on certain people, communities that are living near to the scheme. And there is a view of the revised junction showing the new layout. Now, where we have done quite a lot of work is on walkers, cyclists and horse riders. And I won't go through these changes. Most of the ones here recap things that you already know about the scheme. They are features that have been presented before. So I won't go through those again. I think we jump to the changes if we can. So I said I'd come back to the proposed environmental mitigation round and Tilbury Fields area. And we've looked quite carefully at the linkages in that, and we've worked with Thurrock Council officers to understand where connectivity is needed in that area. So we're proposing some modifications and new connections here to link in. The orange is bridleways, and the blue-green, to my eyes anyway, is pedestrian footpaths. So we're proposing to provide linkages between existing bridleways, existing footpaths, that both go from the shoreline, taking you inland next to the scheme, and also connecting through across into Coalhouse Fort to create a series of a network that people will be able to walk or use to get around the area. Moving along the scheme, we get up to Orsett Fen area. This is quite a subtle change. At this point, if I talk about point 18 first of all, so in Orsett Fen area, we are proposing to put in some more ecological mitigation. This will comprise water vole habitat. Water voles, in order to create a new environment for them, essentially they need a series of ditches filled with water, obviously, that they can swim and live in. And because of that, we've been working closely with Natural England to understand what a suitable design for this area might be. And the subtle change that we're making here is we're actually going to pull the bridleway away from the Mardyke River and run it over some of that mitigation land. So it'll run over a sequence of bridges. They are what we call field bridges. So these are low level. These are not large bridges like the ones holding the scheme. They can be wooden type bridges that are just allow for a track to pass over, running through that area. And then the second change on this drawing is up at 19, where we're putting in a slight realignment and upgrading to a bridleway in that location. That's to provide better connectivity. When we looked at the road network in that area, we were providing quite good provision, or there was existing good provision for horse riders, and then they needed to get off onto the road, which is quite busy and not really suitable for those horse riders. So this better links up the network in the area to make sure they've got a route that is safe for them to move around, but connects to the regional bridleways across the area. One of the other changes that we brought in at the last consultation relates to the nitrogen deposition. So as we all know, fossil fuels from cars, so that's diesel and petrol, as they combust, they produce nitrogen dioxide. That nitrogen dioxide goes into the atmosphere and it falls out as it rains onto the ground. Nitrogen acts as a fertilizer. So what we have changed here, that has always been assessed, but what we've changed in this application is that we have identified that potentially that fallout of the nitrogen onto certain ecologically important sites could lead to potential impacts on those sites. In order to address that, we're proposing to provide compensatory planting that builds on the existing sites and strengthens their resilience in order to compensate, not mitigate, but compensate for the effect we're having. We set this out in a lot more detail in the consultation. I don't propose to go into the detailed technical here because, frankly, I'm not an ecologist and it is quite complex. But what I'll talk to you about is what the proposals actually mean. If we can go to the next slide. So you'll see here in Thurrock we're proposing some compensation areas that are the areas shown in the paler green. So the identified site that has a potential impact on it is in the darker green. And we're proposing to take additional land around that site in paler green and put planting on that will work with the existing site, compensate for any impacts that have by reinforcing the habitat that is provided there. There's two sites there, one on the east, the longer strip, which is a brownfield site, and then the square area closer to the dark green is agricultural land. Both of these will be planted up with a habitat that suits, but it'll also be a relatively open landscape as well. And we hope that that will be a community resource to be able to actually use that land. Smaller changes and refinements. Yeah. So this is described as a smaller change, but I think it's actually one of the more important ones in many ways. It's a realignment of a gas pipeline. So we have to do quite a lot of diversions, as you know, for the scheme. And one of them that we're delivering is a gas pipeline diversion around Orsett. Now, what we've managed to do here is we've done a couple of different things with that alignment as we've refined it. So one of them is that we've managed to pull it much closer to the road, the link roads that connect through to the A13. And that's meant that we've managed to reduce the amount of area that we need for it and reduce the amount of impact that we're having to the south of Orsett. We've also managed to refine the pipeline to go around a veteran tree, which is a little hard to see from the back there, but the little green spot. So we're really getting down into the granular detail with some of this design. We've identified this important tree and we're relocating the gas pipeline around it so that we can leave it in place. That's a positive improvement, I hope you'll see. We've removed the need for a water connection along Dock Road. Further talks with the water companies, and we found we no longer need that. We were going to have to do quite significant works along Dock Road as we laid that water main. We now no longer need to do those works, and those have been removed from the project entirely. We've also looked at the water supply that we were going to provide in the area around Cooper's Shaw Road. We've managed to confirm that actually we're better off taking it along Cooper's Shaw Road rather than the routes that we previously set out. That means that it'll have lower impact on the communities and the environment around that area by taking it along the road. In amongst that, we've made a number of different changes to the land and the order limits that we are requiring for the scheme. So you can see it's a little hard to read there. The orange is what we set out at the Community Impacts Consultation. The land required at the 2022 Local Refinement Consultation. And the last one helps a bit. You can see the changes of where we've taken additional land and where we are no longer taking land. That one is probably hard to see in the room. It will be easier for you to review directly in the slides yourselves. So that takes us through the changes. In terms of our engagement, we have extensive engagement with Thurrock Council. We have a whole sequence of meetings, topic-specific strategic discussions, and we also have cross-local authority discussions. I don't know how many hours we spend talking to each other, and hopefully, I think, exchanging useful information, leading to improvements in our scheme and improving the understanding of the council in what we're proposing to deliver. Really, in the last year since local refinement consultation, well, from community impacts consultation, then through and beyond local refinements consultation, we've had a real focus on certain key matters, looking carefully at how we deliver the scheme. And I think if we go over to the next slide, we can, maybe I'm talking in advance of my slides, but we've really focused on some of the traffic, we've focused on the construction impacts, we've focused on a lot of the controls and the processes that we're putting in place to manage the scheme. And I think that we've made good progress there. There remains a lot of issues outstanding where we are not in agreement, but we have made a lot of good progress along the way as well. So we've responded to the issues raised by the council. I think it's fair to say that after the withdrawal of the application in November 2020, there was clearly a need for a reset in the way that we spoke to each other. There was a need to reset in the way we engaged with each other. And then we had a group meeting with the Planning Inspectorate in September 2021, which Thurrock Council and a number of other local authorities attended, along with myself and others from the National Highways team. And there was a lot of reflection there that there was still a lack of clarity about some of the concerns raised and how we've responded to them. So we've put in a huge effort over the last year to really pick those up, address those issues, make sure that where we have provided a response, that it is clearly set out and that there's an audit trail. And I'd like to really thank Chris Stratford and the rest of the team for the work they put in with us to actually deliver that understanding, that auditable, clear picture between us. We then have worked in the last few months on a statement of common ground. So the statement of common ground, or often called a statement of uncommon ground between friends, sets out the matters for consideration by the Planning Inspectorate. Normally, that's only required at the start of examination. That's often when these are put forward. But we've worked with a number of local authorities, including Thurrock Council, to prepare one to set out at this point in time. I think it really gives a lot of clarity to the position that Thurrock Council are, and it gives clarity to the position of National Highways. I think it will be really helpful to the Planning Inspectorate to understand the nature of our discussions and the positions of both teams. Now, that is currently sitting with Thurrock Council for governance, so that's currently under review. And then we've worked on the Community Fund, and we've had Section 106 meetings talking about how the Community Fund will operate and how the Section 106 will secure some of the matters that we don't consider to be appropriate to put in the draft order itself, such as the skills and employment strategies and things like that. I think that we've made good progress in that space. We aren't necessarily, again, in agreement on all matters, but I think it provides a good basis for the discussions going forward. Next slide. Yeah, so here's some of the things that we've been working through. We've done quite a lot of environmental briefings, and as we've revised and finalised our assessments, the team have recently been sat down with the Thurrock Council team talking about the outcomes of the assessments, the final mitigations that are being proposed in the scheme and the controls, and setting out clearly the changes in the position that we're taking with the final application. We've done a lot of traffic modelling exercises, and this has been on two fronts. One is really focused on the DCO application itself, helping Thurrock Council team to understand how our scheme will change traffic flows on the network, digging into some of the concerns of your officers, particularly around some of the flow through junctions such as Alsett Cock, Manor Way Junction. And then alongside that, we've done a large exercise in running some alternative models to support the council with their understanding of why the scheme behaves in the way it does in terms of regional flows across the area, and why the scheme is laid out in the way it is, particularly in terms of the configuration of the A13 junction and also the potential future Tilbury Link Road. I hope that's been helpful to the council. The team have put a huge amount of work into delivering that, and I think it has brought a lot of clarity from my perspective. I hope it's helpful to you. We've done work on carbon. I believe there's been briefings, but there's an awful lot of work behind the scenes that is going on, where I think Thurrock Council talk with our team, and that covers two things. So it does cover the position that we take in the development consent order application. We're setting out a clear position on carbon in there, but we have aspirations to go a lot further, and we recognise that Thurrock Council have aspirations, particularly around the Thames Freeport area, and thinking about what net zero might look like for Thurrock and in the future, and the opportunities that that brings. And our team are talking regularly with your team about that and about how we can work together in that area to really bring things forward. Some of that requires innovation and novelty, and so we are cautious about what we set in the application itself, because we are legally bound to deliver certain aspects within the application. We want to go beyond that, but where that requires innovation, that requires experiment and risk. And we'd like to work with you together on that experiment and to see what we can develop in the area. And then Tilbury Fields workshops. We did a lot of work with the council earlier in the year, looking at the design of that area. Obviously, we had to go quite a long way back to the drawing board when the Thames Freeport proposals were announced. And so we did a lot of work with the council to talk about those proposals as they evolve and allow for feed into that design process. And I think we've done some good work there. I, again, hope it's appreciated. Next slide. So I won't go through every single one, but obviously the hatch measures have been an important register of the concerns and aspirations and expectations of Thurrock Council. And we've worked through the officers to address them, to work through them all and work out which ones we feel are appropriate to deliver, which ones we can deliver, and to explore and find agreement about as many as we can. And I won't go through them all, but I think we've had a fantastic amount of progress on this. It's not necessarily been the fastest. I think some people might say it was a bit like pulling teeth at times, but we're getting there. And I think we've got a pretty clear position on them all now, some of which I believe are not delivering what has been asked for, many of them which are, and some of which have evolved over that discussion as we've explored each other's position and got to a sort of position of agreement, hopefully, around something that really reflects the intent of what was desired at that point. So I won't go through them all. I think you can read the slides. And then picking up changes that have been made. So through discussions with the council, we've made a lot of changes. Like I say, a lot of the focus has been on the control plans. These were set out on the community impacts consultation. These are really important documents. They're a bit wordy and a bit legalistic, but they are actually the fundamental controls that will dictate what we do and what our contractors are required to do on site. So we've made a large number of amendments. We've worked through the comments that have been made at the various consultations, made modifications, shared words, worked in meetings with officers to agree words that have then been inserted into those documents. We've made a river transport commitment. So again, some of the feedback that we got from the last application was that it was actually fairly unclear how much we were proposing to use the river. So we've made a very explicit commitment to use the river to bring materials to site. That's been shared with the council, and we've had discussions around the wording, and that's been embedded into the application. I won't go through them all again because I'm sure you've read them, but that's the nature of the discussion. We've made a whole sequence of changes as we've gone through, which I do think improve the clarity of the proposals and in many cases improve the proposition as well. So again, I'd really like to thank the council officers for all the work they've done feeding into our work to make this a better application. Acknowledging your position, it's been really helpful for the officers to work with us and improve it. And then another area where there's been a lack of clarity, and if there are any questions about it, we have a number of work streams that go on under what we call designated funds, and we also call it the legacy work stream. To be clear, these are things that are outside of the DCO application. They're matters that we don't consider to be necessary and part of the scheme, but as National Highways, being a responsible promoter in the region and a responsible operator of the road network, there is funding available for a number of measures, and we've worked with the council to develop proposals, take them through, seek funding, and get people on the ground delivering these projects. So everything on the screen here is being done by National Highways or funded by National Highways, but is being done regardless of the fact that we have a DCO here. The Lower Thames Crossing probably brings focus to the area. I would say that's their relationship to the Lower Thames Crossing. And so you can see that so far we've committed 1.3 million to development of all of these matters in the Thurrock area. I won't go through each one in detail. But alongside this, that's not the end of the story. So we are continuing those discussions. So we have a number of funding bids in progress, and then we have a whole sequence of other projects that we're discussing. Now, we can't commit to that funding because we can't commit to these projects until that funding is agreed. But we are actively working that with the council and hoping to bring these projects into fruition. Sorry. That's all right. So, on to programme. And I think we all know where we've been, the progress so far in the blue line, and probably much of the pre-submission examination and next steps. So we're currently very, very, very focused on getting our application together, working long hours to read through a vast amount of wording. We anticipate getting the application in the first 2 weeks of November. That's the area that we're looking for submission. I'm sure there may be more discussion on that. And if we do that, then we would go through an acceptance phase before Christmas. And should we be accepted, I should have said when we do that, should we be accepted, then we anticipate that would give us a DCO decision in 2024. There's some preliminary works that would take place in 2024, assuming successful grant of a DCO. But then main works would really kick off in earnest in early 2025. There's a number of matters that come following grant of a DCO, preparation of further secondary consents and detailed plans that mean that works would start in earnest in 2025, leading to a road opening date of 2029 to 2030. I think that takes us through. I rattled through there somewhat on the grounds that you'd already seen the presentation, so I hope that I didn't go through it too fast, but I wanted to allow as much time as we could for Q&A.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you very much for your presentation as well. Appreciate you attending this evening. What I'd like to do is open up the floor to questions, if that's okay with yourself. I'll start with one. I did a report to Cabinet last week on task force, and one of the things we've discussed quite a lot is the impact on the local road network. And we talked about Southend Road and other roads in and around the A13 that would be impacted. And the numbers we've been looking at show an increase in traffic on local roads. Would National Highways put a commitment in place that they would monitor these traffic levels? So once, how they are now, and then when LTC, if it goes ahead, when that comes in place, would National Highways actually agree to monitor those and then maybe sort of fund any repairs or improvements further down the line if LTC negatively impacts our local roads?
So when Lower Thames Crossing opens, there will be changes in traffic flows across the area, and you're absolutely right, along some roads there will be an increase in traffic flows. Those are clearly set out and will be addressed in the application. Overall, there'll be an improvement in traffic flows. The beneficial impacts on the other roads will outweigh those, but I recognise that some local roads will have an increase in traffic. We have a commitment, a requirement in the application to deliver a traffic monitoring plan, which will look at the operational phase. That will set out a requirement for us to monitor traffic flows on the road network. Now, we've identified a sequence of locations that we will monitor traffic on. We've taken feedback from Thurrock Council and included some of those locations into that monitoring. In addition, we will be required to set out that monitoring proposal and share it with Thurrock Council later down the line. Thurrock Council will be able to feed back on that. They'll be consulted, and then that plan will be approved by the Secretary of State. So we will set out initially some sites where we will monitor. We will then set out some further sites that we will then consult that plan with Thurrock Council, which creates an opportunity further down the line. The timing around the process for that, we're required to have that monitoring in place 1 year before the project opens. And therefore, we'll be sharing the plan, consulting with you in advance of that in order to agree what needs to happen, and then putting in that monitoring 1 year before the road opens to traffic. And then that monitoring will go on for 1 year and 5 years following the opening of the scheme. So yes, we do have a commitment to monitor traffic on the road network. I think it's not necessarily the right time to fix that entirely. There's an awful lot of change that is happening, a lot of development in the area. So it's right to say, well, let's come back to this question shortly before the road opens, a year before the road opens, and revisit and work out exactly what the right locations are at that time. So hopefully that answers the first half of your question. The second half of your question is a commitment to then implement some funding. The answer is no, we're not going to commit to that. There is already a structure in place with government to fund the local road network and the strategic road network. The DFT are the funding body that set out how that funding is delivered to local highways authorities and to national highways. And so that is the framework. Our monitoring is there to support you as you put forward your funding claims to the DFT.
Thank you. I preferred the first half of your answer rather than the second, as here there's no funding. Just 1 year before road opening, I mean, you just mentioned in 2029, 2030. Is that enough? Because the construction phase alone is going to be a massive impact on lots of local communities that are going to have to find new ways to get across the borough. And is 1 year before the road opens, what about the construction phase? What about the impact that's going to have on the local road network? Will that be monitored?
So that's a separate question. Is construction phase traffic monitoring available, a commitment? Yes, it is. So we have a separate plan that will set out the requirement to put in place a monitoring regime for traffic across Thurrock during construction. And we've worked hard with the council. The council team have been very helpful at identifying the locations that they believe traffic monitoring would be necessary. We have built that commitment into our application, and yes, we are committed to monitoring traffic flows during construction. On top of that, we recognise that during construction, we will potentially be having an adverse impact on the condition of some of the roads which we are directing large amounts of traffic over. And some of those roads may not be suitable for the type of traffic that we want to put on them. So we will work with Thurrock Council to identify those areas and, where it's necessary, implement improvements on those roads, and implement those improvements ideally in advance of the works, so that we're not running around trying to patch up after ourselves, but that we get the roads into condition before the works happen, so that it's ready and resilient rather than running about and catching up. And our team have started talk with the council on this.
Thank you, Tim. Councillor Muldowney has a question.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tim, for the presentation. Obviously, in the impacts consultation, which was the one before the last refinement one, there was some traffic modelling data on there which showed that there was going to be considerable impact on local roads around the borough, actually. But if we can just focus in on my ward at the moment, Chadwell is one of the biggest losers, both during construction, obviously, but also once the road was operational. And the effect of that would have been basically to put Chadwell itself within a sort of toxic triangle between the A1089 and the A128 Brentwood Road, which would see sort of between 50 and 80% extra traffic in the operational phase. So I didn't hear, as you were doing your presentation, I was listening for whether anything was being done about that, but perhaps what are you doing to lessen that impact? Is there anything in the changes that you've gone through today which would bring some relief to Chadwell's roads, and also the same for the rest of the borough, where there's going to be this impact in terms of construction and operational phase? Thank you.
First of all, if I can hit that sort of toxic triangle question, we do an air quality assessment. We've set out very clearly the nature of the air quality changes across the region. And we don't create this sort of environment where people are trapped inside the implication of that, a series of polluting roads. We do obviously have an air quality impact close to the road, and that's clearly set out. But we also have beneficial impacts where we are removing traffic from other roads across the area. In terms of traffic flows in Chadwell, I don't have the figures on the top of my head to be able to, but the numbers you're referring to don't actually ring a bell with me. However, what we have done since the community impacts consultation, like I say, is made the modification which really removes the traffic that was using the 1013. It does also reduce the traffic flows on the 128 as well, by providing a better connection through. So hopefully in the latest traffic modelling you've seen an improvement in that, and that was set out in the last consultation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't accept actually that there's not going to be a pollution impact. And are we still waiting for updates on the air pollution, noise and air pollution? Chris, we're still waiting for that impacted.
We have been given a briefing. Sorry. We have been given a briefing for 3 hours last week, I think it was. And we have the presentation that we were given, but that's far from any information that our consultants are able to interrogate or look into. But they say the briefing was pretty much the same as what Tim just said. Whether we agree with it is a different matter.
So, I mean, you know, sort of I've been on this task force for the last, well, this is the 4th year. So I've been used to kind of sitting here and not getting any answers, particularly about health impacts. And I was very disappointed to see in the impact consultation that, you know, you were telling local residents that there weren't going to be any pollution impacts and we're not getting the data to be able to interrogate and actually see if that's true or not. So it seems that that is still ongoing, and I think later on when we get on to sort of some health questions, that data also we're still waiting for. So it's been longer than 4 years probably now, because SIPHAG meetings were going on, I think, for 2 years by the time I joined the task force. So still, I mean, I must say that although you've detailed that a lot of talking has been going on and a lot of meetings has been going on, there does still seem to be, from where I'm sitting, massive holes in the data that we've been given, which is rather disappointing.
So 2 years ago we provided the full previous application. Now what that included was the full air quality assessment for the scheme at that point in time. That set out very detailed air quality, noise, human health impacts across the entire region for receptors that have been discussed and agreed as representative with the council. And that information was shared in order for the council to do this, to understand the information we presented, provided more detail behind the information that we set out at the consultations, and the council reviewed that and provided feedback. Now, clearly we have updated, because when we changed the alignment, that leads to a change in the model. We are producing a finalised model. We remain confident that the impacts that we've set out in all of the consultations are representative and were appropriate to allow for the feedback on the scheme. It set out a clear position that people were able to understand the impacts and provide a response. We are updating the assessments. They will be provided with the final application. And that is normal practice for that final resolution to come. We've got to bear in mind that this submission is not the end of the statutory process. We have a whole examination to go through. The local authority have to prepare local impact reports that feed back on the impacts. We then go through an examination and assessment. So we still have 18 months of discussion around the impacts. The work that we've produced is reasonable, normal and proportionate for where we are at the current stage of the scheme. And it's in line with process, and the next stage of the process will allow us to interrogate that further.
Councillor Kent.
National Highways have told us previously that you don't consider it part of your responsibility to look at how traffic would migrate between the two crossings should there be an issue. Given that there was an issue today and people are reporting 6-hour journey times from Stamford to Purfleet, have you given any thought to kind of reconsidering that and looking at how you would enable traffic to migrate from one crossing to the other without the whole of Thurrock grinding to a halt?
So I think it is our responsibility. I don't think we've ever said it isn't. It is difficult, actually. It is complicated to work out how. But I think we acknowledge that we haven't set out that story clearly about what the situation would be. We're doing some work to better understand the nature of that type of incident, how it would flow. The real challenge about that is, you know, the incident today, who could have forecast today's particular set of outcomes? And any incident is always unique and individual, so it becomes uncertain about what you should actually be considering. But we're doing some work. Hopefully over the next period of time we can share some information that sets a bit more clarity about how the two schemes would behave together. In terms of exactly what would happen in operational terms, that's obviously something that will evolve over time. And as the road network constantly changes and the operational planning of the strategic road network changes over time, then the plans will evolve. And as people learn more about the behaviour of the network and new developments, new changes, we're also going to see a large amount of change in transport flows and, you know, how people get around based on the proposals around net zero carbon will change the nature of movement on the network. So it's really a dynamic exercise to understand exactly how it'll behave. And we'll have these conversations over a very long time. And Thurrock Council will always be part of the resilience forums in the region that look at and understand how issues like today's protest on the road are addressed and resolved.
That doesn't really give us any comfort at all, does it? I mean, we all understand that these are difficult and complex issues, but then building the type of crossing you want to build is a difficult and complex issue. Although, as you say, nobody could have kind of anticipated two people climbing up the supports. The outcome of the crossing being closed is the same no matter what the cause of the closure is. So I don't really understand that point. And you then say that these things will take a very long time. You'll be discussing for a very long time. Frankly, we don't have a very long time, do we, if you're looking at actually getting spades in the ground the year after next. So can you give us some comfort that there is something in the offing that would stop the whole of Thurrock grinding to a halt as traffic tries to migrate from one crossing to another, should something like today happen again?
So we're looking at how we can model this. Models are a forecasting tool that give insights. We're looking at how we can model this, and as we go through that process, we'll look at what operational plans could be put in place and how they might behave. I can't say now exactly what would happen in that scenario or in any scenario. Clearly, any scenario where one of the crossings closes is going to cause problems on the traffic network. I think everybody recognises that. It's a question of exactly how it would operate is something, and yes, we are looking at that, and we will share more information as and when we can.
Okay, so let's look at when things don't go wrong. So the existing crossings have a capacity of about 135,000 crossings a day. We know that that's regularly now somewhere around 180,000 crossings. That means that you must be looking for about a quarter of those 45,000 crossings to be taken at Tilbury, not Purfleet. How have you modelled those 45,000 journeys across the borough?
I'm sorry, I don't follow the question.
So you're looking to reduce capacity, to reduce the amount of vehicles using the existing crossing. Capacity is around 135,000. We know that there are regularly 180,000 crossings a day. That means 45,000 of those crossings you're hoping will be taken by the new Lower Thames crossing. How have you modelled the kind of different traffic flows for vehicles using the new Lower Thames crossing, not the existing?
Okay, so that has a very high-level answer or a hugely complicated answer. The high-level answer, which I can give, is that we have a traffic model that covers the entirety of the southeast of England. And traffic modelling is quite a complex art. It looks at the areas of employment, it looks at the areas of residential, and it then places an interpretation on who is making what journey and puts those onto a network where it then forecasts how people are going to move around the region. And then for freight, it also looks at where things are coming from, where things need to be, and does an interpretation. And we run that for two scenarios. So we run that for a scenario without the crossing, and we run that for a scenario with the crossing. And then we compare the two to understand where the changes in flows come from using that traffic model. The traffic model goes through an independent review to make sure that it's representative. It's also validated, which means that it's compared to actual traffic flows at a certain baseline year, and the baseline year we use is 2016, to make sure that the model is representative of real-life flows on the network. So that model is used to represent the change in flows, and that model produces the outputs that we set out in the consultations to date, and we will set out in the application, that shows the nature of change in traffic flow across the region. I don't know if that answers your question. The next level is far beyond. I would need a traffic modeller with me to answer it.
Laura Blake, who's online.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Tim, for the presentation. Just picking up on Councillor Kent's points there, really, before I just jump into my own question. We know that the design capacity at the crossing is 135,000 vehicles a day, and it's regularly seeing 180,000. That means that we'd need to see a reduction of more than 25% to bring that below capacity. Yet the council's assessment of the data that you provided them suggests that it would take as little as 4% away. So can you just clarify for me whether or not you actually feel that the proposed Lower Thames crossing is going to solve the problems at the Dartford crossing?
So we haven't had a clear answer from the council of where the numbers that have been bandied about come from. We don't recognise them. Our understanding is that they're comparing the forecast performance of the crossing with the Lower Thames crossing in place with the 2016 performance of the Dartford crossing. Now, what we have to recognise is that we have a lot of growth on the network, and between 2016 and 2030 there's going to be a substantial amount of growth and increased volume of traffic going across the Dartford crossing. So if we think that it's problematic today, by 2030, it'll be in a much worse situation. We think there's substantially more than the percentages that you're providing there in order to, as you account for the change in traffic between 2016 and 2030. So we think it's closer to around 20% reduction in traffic on opening of the scheme, and that it comes back below the design standard.
Even if you take it at your 20%, we don't know how long that 20% would last for. It could be the opening day. It might be, 2 years. You don't know how long that's going to be. But even if you take your 20%, that's still not enough to bring it back below capacity. You'd need more than 25% to bring it back below capacity, judging by the 135 and the 180,000 vehicles per day.
What we're doing is that's conflating two things. There's a design capacity and then there's a peak flow. So when we talk about the reduction in percentage, we talk about the percentage reduction in the peak flow, which is obviously the one that is most impactful in the morning and the evening peak crossing. So they are that percentage shouldn't be applied to the 180, which is the 24-hour flow.
Your figures we're working on, and we know that the roads in our area are already very busy, and that the LTC, if it goes ahead, would bring a large increase in traffic, cross-river traffic. Do you have any concerns over any particular areas of the scheme that may not flow freely if it goes ahead? Are there any particular roads or junctions that might end up worse than they are now? What concerns have you got on a local and regional level?
So we do have some areas that have adverse traffic impacts resulting from the scheme, and we talk closely with Thurrock Council about them. One example is Orsett-Cock Junction. Clearly it forms a key integral part of the scheme. We're connecting a number of movements through it. We recognise the capacity that was created by the recent work, and we do put additional traffic through Orsett-Cock Junction, and that means that it loses some capacity.
So you're utilising our local roads to make your scheme work?
It's normal for a strategic road network and the local road network to work together to improve a position on the wider network. And overall, Thurrock Council, in terms of the traffic and economic benefits that Thurrock Council receive, there is an improvement in Thurrock. The disbenefits that we recognise in the model, that we calculate the economic impact of, are far outweighed by the economic benefits that happen on the wider network. For example, the A13 between Orsett-Cock and M25 Junction 30 hugely improves. Junction 30 improves. There's a number of improvements along the A128 leading north to the A127. There's improvements on the A1013, Daneholes roundabout, the traffic reduces. There's a whole sequence of roads across the region where the traffic will improve. You'll get more robust travel. So when you're talking about the situation where on a Friday night it becomes incredibly hard to get along the A13 and to get out onto that road, that will be much better flowing. It will be much safer, and it will be much more resilient network to survive in the event of when there are peak flows of traffic.
I think we're all very aware of what our local traffic issues are, and I think that we can tell by looking at that and the data that you're sharing that this isn't going to work, and that you are going to be bringing a lot of extra traffic and moving the traffic around in a way that doesn't work because of the poor design and the lack of adequate connections with this scheme.
Obviously, I wouldn't agree with that. What would the other connections you would like to see be?
Well, basically, I mean, as we've said all along, this is the wrong crossing in the wrong location. You simply haven't got room to put a crossing in that works. Going back to Councillor Kent's comments about the fact that you're not actually considering or planning how traffic will migrate between the crossings when there are incidents. I'm still not convinced that the Dartford crossing would become under capacity, which means we'd still be seeing a high level of incidents. And that means then that you're going to get a lot of incidents throughout the year where the traffic is not going to be able to migrate successfully without turning absolute chaos through the region to the Lower Thames crossing.
Clearly, we're unlikely to agree on this, but I think our modelling does show a large improvement across the whole network. And the improvement that we see around the approach roads to Dartford mean that it'll be much more resilient in the event. Huge number of the incidents that happen at Dartford are relatively short term, but the problem is because of the lack of capacity at Dartford, they tend to have significant knock-on effects. What we'll see once the scheme opens is because we've got better flow in traffic, we've got a reduction in the traffic through Dartford, we've got better flow in traffic on the network, that recovery after those incidents will be much faster and much less likely to have knock-on effects into the regional network and into Thurrock area.
Thank you for your answer.
Just going back into the room, Councillor Muldowney.
Thank you, Chair. Tim, I can remember sitting here listening to a presentation by one of your colleagues about traffic on the network, where basically he did admit that it would increase traffic overall, because obviously, you know, and that from memory, and maybe Chris will can correct me on this if I'm wrong, that would include 50% increase in non-essential journeys through the building of this road. So we've got a situation here where there is going to be, so people will think, well, if they do relieve the pressure on Dartford, people start thinking, well, you know, maybe I'll go and work in Kent then, or maybe I'll go and visit friends there. I mean, like, living close to the crossing, we know the times not to actually travel over the crossing, Fridays being one of the main ones. How is this road going to improve traffic in the area when we've heard that, I mean, from your own data in the impact consultation, it showed that it was going to put extra traffic onto our local roads, and I mean that the figures that I've quoted are definitely right, and that's from your own literature for Chadwell, because I did a lot of work on that at the time when you were doing the impacts consultation. And isn't it true that overall building this new road is going to increase traffic in the area?
So there's a subtlety about this. What the road does is it creates new opportunities for people to take different journeys. That's the majority of the change in the number of miles travelled, as it were. There is an increase in the number of miles travelled. That's because people who are already travelling from point A to point B for their job have got the ability to travel further. If they can go down to Kent, or they can move around the region because of the extra flow that you get on the flow capacity on the network, and the shorter connections and faster journey times that get. So people take advantage of that. I think what we've got to reflect on is, yes, that does create extra mileage. That's also a benefit. Those people are benefiting from the fact that they have that opportunity. They have the opportunity to go and get a different job. They have an opportunity to go somewhere else. That all creates an economic benefit for the region. It means that employers inside Thurrock will be able to look further afield for employees. That will make them more competitive, be able to have a larger job market to build on. It means people living in Thurrock will be able to go to a wider group of wider employment area. They'll be able to get a job south of the river. They'll have larger choice in where they go. So when we talk about new traffic, or I would say changes in the where people are routing, all of that is a benefit to the individuals involved, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. Yes, there will be changes in traffic flows across the area, but that is all an overall benefit to all of the individuals, and therefore the community and the region.
In the context of climate change and the government's ambition to get to net zero, however, you know, we've had reports that have said that we've got to stop building roads in order to reach net zero, in order to do the things that we need to do to prevent catastrophic climate change, which is obviously, any way you paint it, is definitely a net non-benefit for the entire population of the road. I mean, morally, do you think it's right to still be building roads when we know that we need to get traffic off the roads, and you know, electric vehicles aren't going to solve this problem. You know, we're going to get more dangerous pollution from PM2.5 from electric vehicles because they're heavier, so there's more pollution coming from tyre wear. And, you know, where my ward sits and the neighbouring ward, we're going to have this huge spaghetti junction of roads and bends, so there's going to be a lot of cars braking and lorries braking as they go round them. You know, and these sites are next to schools, new schools that are being built, and existing schools, and also Whitecroft, which is a care home. You know, this is really going to have a massive impact on our children's health and the health of other vulnerable groups in and around that area. And nothing that I've heard on this committee from National Highways has really reassured me that there's anything in the scheme that's going to mitigate that.
So a couple of questions in there. First of all, on climate change. So on climate change, the government set out the net zero plan, and you've expressed a view about electric vehicles, but that is core. That's how we reduce the carbon emissions, is by electrification of the fleet. National Highways obviously working alongside many other parties to look at how that can be brought about. And there are challenges there, particularly around the HGV fleet, and how do you decarbonise those? That is being worked on by government, and we see how their plans evolve over time. In terms of actually delivering net zero, I would say there's a huge economic challenge that the country faces. I think we all know that. And in order to do that, we have to have the resilience as an economy to be able to fund it, to be able to make it work. And so Dartford Crossing is a critical crossing for the region. It's a constraint on everything we do as a country because of the capacity limitations there and the impacts that it has on the region. So by building the new crossing, what we want to do is free up the economic growth across the Thames estuary, across the region, to support delivery of the net zero plan, which is what, the economic growth we need to deliver that. I do think it's a moral situation. I do think that this is the right project to do. Separately on the health, we've shared a lot of information on the air quality assessments. We've shared a lot of information on the noise impacts. There are going to be adverse impacts, and we do work in those areas to look at what we can do to support that. Any scheme of this size is a nationally significant infrastructure project. Has to acknowledge that we do have adverse impacts. That's what the planning process is for. Set out those adverse impacts, set out the reasons why the scheme is being built, and allow for the consideration of those matters together. And that's the process that we're about to embark on as we submit the DCO and go through that examination, is to test those principles and to check that the need for the scheme is such that those adverse impacts are acceptable.
Councillor Raper. Oh, sorry.
One of the mistakes that I think, there are many, that you're making with this new road is to repeat the mistakes that were made when the M25 was first concocted. You completely ignored the fact that traffic from inside the M25 would come out, go round a few junctions and then go back in. So any traffic now that you remove from the Dartford crossing to go to the Lower Thames crossing would encourage more people from in London to come out and use the M25 because they see some gaps. So it's not going to cure the Dartford crossing at all. The Dartford crossing will just stay as it is and go worse and worse. You're not making any significant difference by building this road.
So the modelling recognises that. So if you actually look at the number of crossings that are made through the Lower Thames crossing and compare that to the crossing that happen at Dartford, you get a much more substantial relief than the level of relief that we're talking about. And the reason that you get you don't see the full relief that would be seen by a direct subtraction of the numbers for the Lower Thames crossing from Dartford is because you do get local people who currently cannot cross or choose not to cross because of the condition at the Dartford crossing, now choosing to make that journey over the Dartford crossing. They will come from either side of the M25, so they'll come from the Thurrock side, they'll also come from inside, come from both directions. So the modelling recognises what you're saying, reflects, and everything we're presenting sets out that position, considering that fact.
So we'll still have the congestion just from a different place?
So our forecasts show lower traffic flows across Dartford. It shows a reduction in the congestion. So although you do get these people choosing to make different journeys, choosing to cross the Dartford crossing, overall there is still a reduction.
Can you share the modelling that you say demonstrates this with us?
So that modelling has been set out in the consultations. It's also been shared with the council, who've been working through their own review of it, provide feedback on the details of that, and it'll also be set out in the application, and that will be something that we will be talking about for the next 18 months.
Chris, have we seen that modelling?
Yes, we've been given what's called a cordon model of the operational traffic predictions. That was given to us, I think, in May of this year, and we have prepared a report about it. It's quite a technical report. Colin will be able to answer any questions you've got better than I can. I'm not a transport person, but yes, we've got that. We've also got a cordon model of the construction traffic, which we got a month later in June, I think, and we're still going through that. The difficulty, I suppose, the council's had all along is we get our cordon, Havering gets its cordon, Essex, I think, got 4 different districts, but not Thurrock, and we're not allowed to share the information between us, so we don't actually see the sort of wider picture of what happens beyond our own boundaries. We have asked to have the LTAM model, as it's called, the full model, shared with us under a range of qualified provisions, and that's been refused. So, Colin, I don't know whether you want to add anything further to that. You have a better understanding of these things.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Just only to say that I think Tim will recognise the fact that we have some differences in opinion as to what the model is actually telling us, and I think Tim's obviously presenting a different perspective to the one which we have highlighted in our analysis of the modelling data, and we still have some very significant concerns about what the model is telling us, and also seeking those reassurances for understanding what happens if we get it wrong. And we all know that, as Tim has mentioned before, modelling, there's an art to modelling. It's not always accurate, so that's why we really want to make sure that there's good monitoring in place with conditions attached to that monitoring that says, okay, well, if it does exceed these limits, this is what we'll do, and this is how we'll address those effects if they do come to fruition. Because what we don't want is another situation where we're looking for another crossing in another 10 to 15 years' time because we've run out of capacity again, and we need to expand the capacity again. And we don't want an even worse situation for traffic in Thurrock when there are incidents on the network. This is a really good opportunity to step back and think, well, how will this network operate effectively when there are incidents on the network? And I think National Highways' own publicity for the scheme highlighted the fact that there were over 300 incidents on average a year where the network was delayed for 29 minutes or more. And so one of the things we still haven't done, and we still need some assurance from National Highways, is how the network will operate in this new regime with a lower Thames crossing, to ensure that the gridlock that residents of Thurrock regularly experience when there are incidents on the strategic road network are properly addressed.
If I can just clarify for you one point, sorry, Chris. We share a cordon model of Thurrock. The model is the full model, so it sets out, it allows people to actually put it on a computer and run their own results. We share traffic flows for the entire modelled area, which is the whole southeast of England pretty much, more or less. I get shot for saying that by the team. But we share the results of the model for the entire region with all of the authorities. The Cordon model, which is the sort of detailed model software that allows us to develop those results, that's the one that we should limit to the local authority.
If you're so confident that you're making the right reasoning from this, why do you not share that as well?
So we'll share the model once we get to the end of the process. We share the model in the interim period to allow local authorities to do detailed analysis of their own network and also to support them as they develop their own local plans. But we don't share the full model for the scheme until the end of the process.
Councillor.
Have that to look
Sorry.
forward to.
Councillor Kent.
Thanks, Chair. I can't help feeling that we've not really made very much progress this evening. We've not actually learned very much, which is a bit disappointing. Can I just ask a direct question that you might be able to answer for us? We know that, for instance, building cost inflation is running at about 20%. So what's your current estimate for the cost of this project?
That's not one I have the figures off the top of my head, to be honest. I look after the DCO and the application there. I couldn't give you the cost off the top of my head, and I wouldn't want to give the wrong one here. So if we can clarify that afterwards.
So you didn't think that that might be a question that you'd be asked this evening?
I didn't prepare for that one, no.
Councillor Raper.
Thank you. Perhaps my next question follows on quite easily from Councillor Kent's, and it might be easier for you to answer. Has the Treasury increased the budget for the crossing, for the proposed crossing? That's just a yes or no answer, really.
No, we're maintaining the same budget envelope that we have set out previously.
And with the increasing costs that are likely to arise, do you still feel confident that that would be sufficient?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Now, the other one, my other question is, there's been a lot of talk from central government about economic growth. If we look at the proposals for the Lower Thames crossing to go ahead, a lot of it now has morphed into being about connectivity of the ports. Obviously, traffic is going to have to be moved. It's going to go through Stamford. There's no direct link for the Tilbury ports, which are increasing all the time. DP World, London Gateway and so on will all be impacted. Can you explain really how the government's aim for growth and the local councils will be supported were this proposed crossing to go ahead?
So the crossing as it's proposed provides huge benefits to the ports and to the region. Basically, if you're coming out of Tilbury Port and that area, you'll have a direct link that takes you straight up, free flow, onto the M25, essentially bypassing junction 30 of the M25, where we know there are congestion challenges. So it really improves the connectivity from Tilbury Port up to the north. The same for DP World. Traffic coming out of DP World will also be able to take the route right up to free flow connectivity up the M25 through to the north. So DP World also benefits from better connectivity. So
what about any of those places that may wish to go to the south?
in terms of connecting through to the south, there'll be increased capacity at Dartford Crossing, and there will be connectivity through onto the scheme, particularly from DP World. We'll be able to connect to get through and go south as well. I focus on the north because that tends to be where the traffic from those areas is tending to go. But there'll also be connectivity coming up from the Lower Thames Crossing through and connecting out on modification now gives it much better connectivity onto the Freeport area. Then obviously there is the future, recognising Thames Freeport as it comes forward. I talked a little bit about the potential for Tilbury Link Road. Tilbury Link Road remains a RIS3 project, and we're talking with Thurrock Council and with the Port of Tilbury about what a link road might look like that could connect onto the Lower Thames crossing. We sought instruction from DFT and DLUC at the point of time that we were reconfiguring the route, and they were clear they still supported the Tilbury Link Road, but recognised that it needs to be a separate scheme to serve its own purpose to deliver the regional growth that's needed, and separated out from the Lower Thames crossing.
Thank you. My final question then is, what's the current estimated figure for economic growth that would be a direct result of the crossing?
Again, that's a number I can't give you straight up. It will be available shortly, the revised figure. Meanwhile, if you want, I can provide a follow-up which sets out that figure from a previous calculation.
I think that would be important. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. A quick question from myself, something that sprang to my mind as you were talking there. In terms of the business case for LTC, obviously the free ports were not a thing, so to speak, when LTC was first proposed. So how has the business case changed now that free ports are adjacent to the LTC land?
So we measure our business case, and again, this is starting to go outside of my territory. So I'm going to be cautious in how I describe this because it isn't my expertise. But effectively, we measure the transport benefits and the connectivity benefits from the road network, and that's called a level 1 benefit. We then have further benefits that come from the connectivity and so on. Now, at the current time, we are not modelling the free port, so any business case that we put forward at the moment will not account for the additional benefits that will happen when the free port comes online. That's because the free port doesn't meet a certain criteria, in as much as it doesn't have planning applications that are submitted and in play at the moment to set out what those benefits are. I'd love to include them, but there's challenges to the delivery of that. When the Freeport comes online, obviously that would improve the business case as it takes advantage of the additional benefits that the scheme provides. But at the moment, all we can say is that strategically there would be a benefit. As to, the Freeport would support our business case. The benefit we put on the road network supports the Freeport business case. So they're sympathetic to each other, but they don't actually build on one another at the moment. Talking about the formal calculations and documents.
Thank you, Tim. So as you're not modelling for the free ports at the moment, are you modelling for what the additional traffic and perhaps noise and air pollution that the free port would generate? Are you modelling for that around LTC?
So we include in the model growth that comes from a number of areas. The answer I'm going to give you will say, no, we're not, but I want to explain that further. So we allow for the growth in movements of people that are set by the government. We allow for growth in movements of freight that are set by the government. We also allow for growth that arrives through specifically defined developments. So, for example, Thames Enterprise Park that recently got consent, that is allowed for in the model. Tilbury 2 is allowed for in the model because they've got consent. We also allow for a number of developments around Purfleet, for example, that are in the process of seeking consent. At the moment, the Freeport doesn't have anything on in an application in process information available for us to be able to build that into the traffic model. So we haven't allowed for that and accounted for that.
After submission of DCO, if Freeport application did come through, then would you adjust your modelling to suit?
We would run what we call a sensitivity analysis. So yes, we would retain our core scenario because that's the basis of the application, but we would run an analysis that built in the Freeport data so that people could essentially do a differential check and understand the differences that would arise.
Okay, thank you, Tim. I'm going to go to the following. Laura, then Councillor Byrne, then Councillor Muldowney. Laura Blake.
Thank you, Chair. Tim, judging by your previous answers to the costs on the finances, I'm not sure that you would have been able to tell me what the latest benefit cost ratio is that you shared with Treasury. Is there any chance you can maybe tell us why you've refused to share the outline business case for the LTC with the council and us?
So we put forward a position that we wouldn't share the outline business case because it's still not an approved form by DFT and therefore is in draft. However, we recognise that the Thurrock Council went to the Information Commissioner's office, they made a decision today and have asked us to release it. We are currently considering that position. We have the opportunity to appeal, so we are considering whether to appeal, and we will get back to you shortly to let you know our decision.
It seems very strange that if you're so confident in this scheme being so good, why you won't freely share that without having to go through council and us to try and go through freedom of information for that. Seeing as it's not very forthcoming with the information on the financial side, can we maybe change the topic slightly and move over to safety? We know that the LTC is going to be an all-purpose.
Sorry, Laura, I think Tim just raised his hand.
Sorry.
Sorry to interrupt, Laura. I just wanted to say that all of the economic information in the business case was actually superseded by information that was provided to Thurrock Council 2 years ago, which set out in detail all of the economic benefits that you're asking about. We are obviously revising and updating those figures for the final application, but all of the economic information, that includes the local economic benefit to Thurrock, it includes the cost of the scheme and the profile. All of that has been set out, has been shared in a form that actually superseded the business case that you're seeking access to.
I would just say to that it is public money that you want to spend on this project, or waste as we would put it on this project. So do you not think that the public deserve to have that kind of information as well? We're told about the economic benefits, but no one ever will come up with a figure for us and tell us what they're meant to be.
It's not normal practice to share a draft business case. The Green Book guidance was updated last year, and it's set out now that it is required that after a business case is approved, that a summary is published so that the public can see that. That's the government guidance, and we follow the government guidance on it.
Okay. Just if I may then, to jump back to my question about the fact that we know that it's an all-purpose trunk road, but that it's being designed to smart motorway standards, as we've been told previously and we've got in writing. When we've previously asked questions about the difference between all-purpose trunk roads and motorways, we've been told that the only real difference is the colour of the road signs. Obviously green for an all-purpose trunk road and blue for a motorway. If that's the case, can you please explain how green signs rather than blue signs means that this road would be any safer than if it had motorway classification? And we believe that the emergency services have probably got some concerns over this as well. What evidence and reassurances can you give in regard to the safety aspects of the LTC? Do you have any concerns?
Obviously, we're very concerned about the safety of the road. Safety on the road network is a really important matter for national highways, and we have very strong internal directions about how we need to improve safety across all of the network. What we're building is a trunk road built to the latest new standards. It's a new trunk road that will be built to the highest standard, the standard for that. It's aligned with the standard that's been used on a number of other roads around the area. It's taking on board the latest requirements in terms of spacing of the emergency areas. It's taking on board the latest requirements in terms of messaging, in terms of lane detection, and it will all be built and kept up, maintained to the latest safety standard for roads across the network. And these are some of the safest roads on the network. So the idea that it's an unsafe road is not actually, because we're able to build this infrastructure from new, we can build it with safety right at the heart of it. So it'll be much safer than many of the other roads across the network, and substantially safer than the current Dartford crossing, which, as we know, is one of the most problematic areas for incidents across the whole of the UK.
We know that the government are currently reviewing, and you're getting 5 years of safety data for smart motorways being collected and analysed at the moment, and everything's paused. So I don't think you still really answered my question on what the difference is, other than the colour of the signs. How does this make the LTC, if it goes ahead, any safer than a smart motorway when you are designing it to those standards and using smart motorway technology?
So there is currently a review going on into smart motorways, and a pause in that programme, as we know, as that data is reviewed. What that is a review on the conversion of motorways to smart motorways. As I say, we're not doing that. What we are doing is building a new road to the highest standard of a trunk road, and it is built to an extremely high standard of safety.
I think the whole safety issue with smart motorways is due to the fact, actually, that there is no hard shoulder, and that the technology is not working, and that the centres that are monitoring it are not geared up with the latest and best technology that can do it. So are you going to improve all of that for the LTC? Is it going to have a dedicated control centre that actually has equipment that is working, enough staff to monitor it and to react to it adequately?
I think there's been a lot of learning from the Smart Motorways programme, and that learning has been built into standards which have been refined and revised over time. That is all being built into the scheme. We're also checking that we have the flexibility to be able to build in further and new requirements as they might be brought forward as that learning develops over time. LTC won't have its own control centre for the road network. There will be for the tunnel portal to look at the operation of the tunnel itself, but not for the road network. Instead, it'll be integrated into the existing operational framework for all of the motorways across the region. That allows it to operate better in terms of its performance. It integrates with the wider system, and it'll also help in the future in terms of how you manage the road network in the event of incidents. You want one operating centre looking at the whole network rather than, Lower Thames Crossing operating on a completely different framework to everywhere else. So it'll be integrated into the wider road network. I think the most important thing that you've said, and I think I've answered, is yes, I think there is learning that has to have come from the Smart Motorways programme, and National Highways generally has learned. That's been built into the standards. We're building to deliver those standards.
It's a very big concern that you feel that putting extra pressure on the control centres that are already struggling and failing to identify, and literally people are dying because of this, is considered to be that you're adding the LTC to that and using it is absolutely a serious concern. And as for National Highways learning lessons, I'm sorry, I would think a majority of the people in this country do not agree with that, because you have no consideration at all for how dangerous these roads are. They shouldn't be called smart motorways. They should be called killer motorways, because your technology and the removal of those hard shoulders, exactly the same as we would have on the LTC, goes ahead, are deadly. And you need to start looking at that, because you're saying that you're going to have 0 fatalities on the road by 2040, some of your team. That is not possible. That's not realistic. What we would like is for it actually, if it does go ahead, that you are taking the safety seriously. And we know the figures that you've shared show that there would be fatalities and serious incidents on this road. It is a smart motorway by stealth.
So we do take safety seriously. We forecast an overall reduction in safety on the network as a result of the Lower Thames Crossing. Now, there are going to be, as always, when you have people using a road, you do a forecast of the safety to understand that. That assessment shows in the event of nothing else, yes, there would be incidents, and those incidents would lead to injuries and fatalities. And we're responsible, so we do a calculation of that so that that can be assessed and understood. If you don't understand it, you can't work to reduce. And as you say, 0 fatalities by 2040 is the aspiration of National Highways. So we're working to deliver that. But overall, the opening of the Lower Thames Crossing would reduce the number of incidents and fatalities per mile travelled across the network. So we do actually improve safety overall, and we are looking very carefully, and will continue to work as national highways to look at the safety of the roads and make sure that they operate as well and as safely as we can.
That doesn't match up with the information that we've been given that shows there would be an increase in incidents. But I'm aware that other people have lots of questions, so I'm prepared to take that up offline. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne.
Your thinking seems to stop at the Altic Cock. Are you aware that places like Corringham and Stamford Hope, it's going to have a massive impact on us, but all we hear is Altic Cock and then we're forgotten about. So why is that?
So, yes, I am aware you've got Orsett, Manaway, Five Bells, and the challenge you've got there is that you've got a parallel road, effectively, from Orsett Cock to Manaway and then on, and then it runs through the communities to the east of that, through Corringham. And the traffic modelling at the moment does show, and we acknowledge, that there would be an increase in flow along that network. Now, obviously, that is a concern. So National Highways are looking at the performance of the A13. There is a proposal on the table to trunk it, bring it into the strategic road network. That would then allow National Highways to take ownership and responsibility for that section of the road. And if it were in National Highways, we'd be able to do route strategies and look at an investment programme to improve that corridor. And that would help reduce some of the adverse impacts that happen out on communities around that area.
Just thinking that's our 60 million, was it how much we spend on it, and you're just going to grab it? That seems a bit odd to me.
Just conscious of the time, so as I go around to other people that have been waiting, it just you can make it your last questions of this evening, please. Councillor Muldowney.
Thank you, Chair. Just a tip, Tim, and if you could pass this on to other colleagues who might come to this meeting, we will always ask the question of how much is this going to cost now. So if please, either yourself, if you're coming back, or any of your colleagues, please could you come with that information, because we literally ask it at every meeting and don't get an answer. So I just want to say that and move on to my final question, which is about other kinds of costs. So in particular, the carbon cost. And it's been reported that because of changes to the way the BEIS now records the costs of carbon, obviously we've got a big concrete pour here. We've got 2 million tonnes in construction, and we've got another 3.2 million tonnes of emissions in the operational phase over 60 years. So we're talking about a lot of carbon emissions with this project. Previously, National Highways has estimated, I think, 150 million, a cost of 150 million from the carbon emissions. I think this is just we're talking about construction only here. Because of these changes now, there's been a rise of almost 230%. So now the estimate is around 500 million, a cost of 500 million. Given that you've already said that there's no extra budget coming from government, does the economic case now stack up?
So I think the cost you're referring to is how you actually quantify the impact of carbon into your development of the BCR. So it's not money that is directly spent out, it's how you quantify the cost to the economy of those additional carbon emissions. If I understand that correctly, and the answer to that is yes, you know, the business case does still stack up despite the increased cost of carbon that's come through the guidance telling us that we need to allow more for the cost of carbon considering the impact on the economy.
How will that be mitigated? Because I mean, we've heard National Highways say that this will be the greenest road ever, which I find very hard to believe, and that there's been a reduction in carbon costs by a third. But obviously, we're seeing that actually there's been a rise of 230%.
So the reduction is in terms of the tonnes of carbon. The cost increase comes because, as the government pushes us towards net zero, they increase the cost that we have to allow for the amount of carbon we produce in order to make it more challenging, in a sense, to get a business case through that has a high carbon footprint. In terms of how it's going to be mitigated, you're probably aware that we've been designated a Pathfinder project. What that actually means is that I was talking a little bit about innovation and trying to work hard with the local community and across the region, industries, businesses, to deliver carbon reductions. We recognise that we have got a carbon footprint associated with the construction. We're setting that out in the application so that we're very clear on what that is. That carbon footprint has been calculated based on genuine existing measures that we can implement to drive down the amount of carbon that we will produce during construction. But that's not enough. That's not where we want to be. So we've got a multi-pronged programme, as it were. So within the DCO itself, we're challenging ourselves to reduce the overall carbon footprint, put in place processes that require us to work with the contractors to innovate, to find new ways of delivering this project that reduce the amount of carbon that we'll emit during construction. And then our contractors are being incentivised. We're building contract incentivisation in to require our contractors, first of all, to measure carbon, but then to drive it down. And we'll set them hard targets and work with them to really reduce the amount of carbon emissions associated with that construction programme. Excuse me, starting to. And then we're looking to work. You may be aware that we've gone to market recently to do a market engagement exercise to understand from local businesses in the region and nationally what understanding there is about use of alternative fuels during the construction programme. We're keen to trial things like hydrogen in plant, which is not common practice at the moment. We're keen to try, basically work with the industry to find new ways of delivering lower carbon than we're currently setting out. But we have to set a firm baseline that we know we can achieve, and we set that out in the application, and that's what's quantified.
Just on a related thing, do you, in your opinion, do you think it was a mistake not to have investigated sort of dual, not just building a road, but improving the other public transport links, trains, etc.? Do you think it's a mistake that when this project was conceived, you didn't think more about how to actually address some of the climate change issues by giving us not only a road but other means of transport which would be more friendly to the environment?
So that was looked at carefully in 2009 and 2016 as the decisions were made around the scheme. It looked carefully at rail to understand whether a rail would be an alternative, whether a rail would be a complementary addition into the project. And what it found was that there isn't actually a need for the rail network to connect in the place that we have. Currently, the rail tends to be all in towards the city. And in terms of providing the linkage that we're providing, you wouldn't be able to provide the link we're providing just with the Lower Thames crossing. It would be a wholesale change to the rail network across the southeast of England, if you were to even attempt to try to provide that provision. There simply isn't the connectivity for rail into distribution, into the areas that are required to provide the capacity that currently is taken by HGVs. And the people who are using the crossing tend not to be wanting to use routes that are served by the current rail network. So you can't look at the crossing in terms of just should you have a rail crossing there. You have to look at it in terms of where it sits in the wider network, just as we do with the road. And there isn't a need for rail here that would solve the problem at Dartford.
I'm mindful of time, so there's many more questions I could ask, but I'll leave it there.
Councillor Aranunji, who's online.
Oh, thank you very much for the opportunity. I have been listening attentively, trying to understand what is really going on with regards to the new road. My worries from what everyone's been saying here is the impact it's going to have on the additional road in the local area. But also, I just like to get this clarification here. My understanding is that the team have not yet received any operational plan that responds to the incident and the diversionary routes of the varieties of scenarios, changes in traffic, flow of emergency access, pricing to reflect the demand of the inflection, pressure, and also operational reduction in the local roads. When will this be made available to the council for review? Do you have any idea?
So if I can pick some of those up. In terms of the incident modelling, that's and understanding the behaviour of incidents, that's ongoing over the next few months, and we'll share that as it evolves. In terms of the, I believe you said about the latest cost estimates and forecast economic benefits.
Exactly.
Yeah, those will be shared along with the submission. So as I say, that we're hoping for within the first 2 weeks of November, and we'll share it with the council very shortly afterwards, within a couple or 3 days of the submission. That'll be shared with Thurrock Council. And then in terms of the impacts on the local roads and the flows, that has already been shared with the council. And as Chris said, they've been working through that and preparing a report on it so that you can provide informed information into the process. I think that was the points he raised. Were there any others?
I think, yeah. I mean, on the issue of the impact of the traffic on the local roads, have you considered alternative route, probably talking about railway design, as a kind of a sustainable means of transport to mitigate the problems we're going to be having?
Yes, so that forms a key part of the decision-making process that we've followed since 2009. We've looked carefully at alternative provision and whether there is an ability to provide alternative provision. The process requires you to consider that before you land on a road scheme. So that process has been followed through. I think I've already explained our position on rail, so I won't go back over that. But effectively, no, we were unable to find any other mechanism to solve the problems at the Dartford crossing, other than the scheme that we're providing.
You did say that the railway has already been considered. Is it more? Why didn't you take that as a viable option rather than going into design, taking on to the route?
Like I explained, it's because of how the crossing would fit into the rail network. And you have to have a rail network that would support a crossing of that type. And the regional rail network and the need for people to travel don't tie together to allow rail to be a suitable provision.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Laura Blake, your final questions, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I could jump in about rail, but I'm not going to because I'm aware that we're monitoring time. Tim, I would just firstly like to thank you for coming. You obviously got the short straw tonight to come along on your own, and you quite clearly, hopefully you're picking up the fact that we're not happy. We do have serious concerns. Us, the council, our MPs. Stephen Metcalfe, our MP, has actually called for an urgent debate on the LTC. The MPs in the area are going to have a meeting with Anne-Marie Trevelyan, the new Secretary of State for Transport. I hope that you can take away tonight and tell the rest of your team that we are still concerned, that we still feel that we haven't got adequate information. And I would ask that you hold off on submitting this DCO application until some more of these issues are actually discussed and rectified with some meaningful engagement, please.
Thank you for inviting me. It's always good to come and actually talk to each other. That's really important part of actually discussing and understanding each other. I don't think that we'll agree on positions often, but it's still worth having the conversation. In terms of actual submission, obviously we're working hard to submit it. And what we have to bear in mind is the conditions at Dartford. They are increasingly getting worse over time as growth impacts it. Delays to our scheme would lead to delays to the benefits that we deliver to the Dartford crossing, the people living around there, the communities impacted by it, and I know that's Thurrock, so it would delay the benefit that we deliver to you. So fundamentally, it's not really, in my view, in the public interest to delay. And I would like to flag, there is a formal, structured process that the government have put in place. Go back to what I said earlier, that this doesn't end at submission. Submission is just us moving into the next phase, where perhaps the discussion through the framework of the dictated process, the Planning Act, and the way that is set out, is designed to handle this type of discussion, is designed to handle this type of difference of view between a promoter and the local authority, and to put a framework around that discussion so that it can be helpfully considered, work through together, and allow the Secretary of State to make a decision based on a fully informed discussion. And from my perspective, it's time now that we enter into that process.
Surely it's in the public's interest to actually make sure you've got a scheme that will actually fix the problems. And when you've got concerns, serious concerns, from so many levels, from the public through local authorities, not just Thurrock, other local authorities as well, right up to MP level, you need to be addressing this. And if they've got concerns, surely you should be addressing that rather than going to DCO, where we will have limited time and you've withheld so much information from us. We are actually going to be up against it on all levels, from public through to the council, to review the information because you're withholding it until you get your DCO application accepted. It's unacceptable, and the system is not designed for you to be withholding so much information. It's meant to be a process where we actually get to be consulted adequately, and that has simply not happened in this instance.
I think we have shared information. A huge amount of information has been set out through the process of consultation, through sharing the previous application. We've shared an enormous amount of information, far beyond any other road scheme, to allow you to understand what our proposals, the effects of our proposals on the network. So I don't think we can agree on that. I think that we have set out more information than any other scheme of this kind. And in terms of concerns, we also have a huge amount of support from MPs, support from communities, support from local authorities in the area who recognise that this problem at Dartford is one that has to be solved, and that it's time now for us to move to the next stage, and it is essential that this project gets the scrutiny that it needs. So that's where we stand.
Obviously, we're not going to agree on it, but the evidence that you have presented to us shows that, yes, we do need to solve the problems at the Dartford crossing, but the proposed Lower Thames crossing simply won't do that.
I think it's safe to say we agree to disagree on that one. Lord, do you have any final question, or are you all done?
I've got lots of questions, Chair, but I know that we're up against it on time, so I will say that I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Robert Quick.
One last question from me. What message are you going to take away with you back to your home base after tonight?
Check on the costs before I come back next time. No, I mean, yes, fair point. I'll take that criticism away with me. But to seriously answer the question, you're still concerned, and I understand why you're concerned, and I understand that there is a desire to see more information. We need to follow the process. We need to get that information out there, and we need to have the conversations about it. I think my takeaway at the moment is that I'm wary that there's a lack of, I'm going to say a lack of trust, that what we've said to date is fair and reflective of what's going in the application. And there's an amount of trepidation that what we're actually going to put over the line doesn't reflect what you've seen to date. And what I'd like to say is that if there's an opportunity to come back and talk about specific matters in the application and take people through them, then I'll take that, you know, to work through and help people understand the proposition and to really sort of get to grips with it. It is going to be challenging after submission. So we need to do what we can to support local authorities in their understanding and preparation for the next stage. I think that's what I'm actually taking away, that there's a lot of trepidation about that, and if we can do anything to support that, then we should.
Okay, and with that, just bear in mind, the original concept that was come up with about this project was to fix the problem at the Dartford crossing. Right? Nothing else, no other fancy bits on the side. It was to fix Dartford. We're not convinced that you're fixing Dartford. It's staying as it is, more or less, with the increase in traffic. So you haven't met the original reason for having the project in the first place. So you need to do more than that.
So I think that goes to my point. I think we need to do more to explain how we are fixing the problem at Dartford, because I think we are fixing it. I think it is demonstrable in the information that we have. We need to tell that story better. And if we can do that to help you, then we will.
Can we not, sorry Chair, can we not have that before you put the DCO in? This is something that you should have been able to explain to us by now, and you've failed on that. Why can't you answer these questions before the DCO goes in?
Did you want to answer that, Tim?
I think we have shared that information. We have explained our position, but we will continue to do so. We'll continue to try to find different ways to explain it, to find a connection to help you access the information.
I think you can probably tell there's a layer of frustration in information that we haven't received always as regularly as we'd like and in the formats we'd like. Hello, Councillor Kent.
So you use the word trust, and I think we all want to trust National Highways. We all want to work with National Highways, but I think we've all been disappointed this evening because instead of openness and transparency, we've had evasion and secrecy, and at times what's come across as thinly veiled contempt for Thurrock. So I guess my question is, how do you think National Highways is perceived by the people of Thurrock?
I'm sorry that you took it that way. I'm disappointed if that's what you've taken away. I've tried to come and I've tried to answer questions, to answer them honestly and clearly. I don't believe I have been evasive. I've just tried to give you the answers to the questions that have been asked of me. So I'm disappointed if that's what you're taking away. I think the people of Thurrock are also trepidatious. I think the people of Thurrock are nervous. Our team speak to people. We get a whole mixture of views. Clearly there are people who don't want National Highways around, who don't want the scheme. Equally there are people who absolutely want the scheme, who believe that it's essential and necessary. There's a whole mix of opinions out there. We hear them all. So there's a diversity.
Councillor Byrne?
Yeah, just following on with what John said. I'm disappointed as a councillor, but I'm even more disappointed as a resident.
Laura, you've got your hand raised?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I just can't resist the fact that I have to comment when Tim's comment about you're listening to people. You have a map that you've had on your website asking for people to show their support for your project. Where's the option to show the opposition? You're just collecting and listening and presenting biased information. As chair of the Thames Crossing Action Group, I represent thousands of people, and I can tell you we're not happy. We're angry and we don't trust you and we don't trust the LTC. It's not going to work. And it's your job to explain and share the information. And as an organisation, you have failed on that on every level, from the start of consultation right through to present day.
I'm not sure it's helpful to continue to sort of debate. I think we've set our positions clearly.
I do want to thank you for coming today, Tim. I think absolutely. And in the past, we've normally had quite a few members of the team from National Highway, so to make the journey on yourself, I really do appreciate that. I want to reflect that from the chair. Yeah, thank you very much for your time this evening. I know it's been going on for near enough 2 hours, so we appreciate you taking the questions. We'll give you a couple of minutes to collect you. I'm sure you don't want to sit here for the rest of our meeting, and yes, there's a water at the back. Thank you.
If I can just say again, thanks for inviting me. You know, I really think it's important to keep talking to each other.
We'll just take a minute or two before we go into the rest of the agenda. And Colin Black to present.
I'm not entirely sure what update you need that I haven't done already, but I can set out the process and the timetable. Is that what you're after?
If you could set out the basics in terms of members of the public and residents who might want to watch this in the future, just so they have a little step process of what to expect coming up.
Sure. Okay. As we've heard from Tim, it goes in the first 2 weeks of November. By mid-December, we would have then submitted our adequacy of consultation representation, and PINS will have made a decision to whether to accept the application. At that point, we'll have access to the whole range of documents, probably in the range of about 60 documents. For the adequacy, we only get to see 2. The consultation report, which was 2,500 pages last time and is likely to be bigger, and a statement of engagement, which is they've decided to try and point out all the positives in the technical engagement, and we'll have to review that too. So that gets us to mid-December. If it is not accepted, there will be a time of some months, I would think, for regrouping from the point of view of National Highways. Last time that happened, it's taken 2 years to get to this point, so who knows. If it is accepted, against this Council's recommendations, I suspect, we then embark on what's called the pre-examination period, which is usually somewhere between 3 and 5 months. And the reason that takes so long is because they first of all need to appoint 5 inspectors to review this whole documentation, and they need to read everything, and it will be 60,000 pages, which will be probably about 30 metres of shelf space, 30 metres of shelf space, something like that, I'm guessing. It'll all be online, naturally. So they need to do that. They need to consider what questions they might want to ask, either the applicant or the authority or other stakeholders. And we need time to prepare our local impact report and our written representation. So that process all happens in that sort of 3 to 5 month period. Then they will issue what's called a Rule 6 letter, which sets out the when the preliminary meeting, the start of the process formally, will happen, and they will then set out the timetable for the entire process, right the way through to the end of the year. And the timetable doesn't have any flexibility, none. So when there are hearings set, you have to attend, or not attend, or attend virtually. When you get the questions through, and the majority tend to go to the applicant, but we're undoubtedly going to get some, and you have 3 weeks, only 3 weeks to respond. Those questions can cause the need for a paragraph or a book in response. So it can be quite onerous, certainly for the applicant. There will be a number of hearings. There will be compulsory purchase hearings where people get to question about their land or their property being taken. There will be specific topic hearings such as noise, traffic modelling, etc. And it will be up to the PINs to set those out. And then there'll be a number of open floor hearings where members of the public can go and ask any questions they like, if they have registered as an interested party. The guidance on the Planning Inspectorate website sets out a whole range. I think there's about 17 advice notes. And advice note 8 has 6 parts, 8.1, 8.2 through to 8.6. And it sets out how interested parties can engage in the process. I will do a summary of that at the appropriate time, let everyone know how to operate, and we can put it on both the Council's formal website and indeed this new website we have for LTC. So it'll be available. If the Council want to then publish it in the newsletters and all the rest of it, that's fine too. And the process has 6 months, and it will not be any longer, and it's unlikely to be much shorter than 6 months. And if you don't engage with the deadlines, you are ignored. And we've tried to warn the team about how this will be probably the busiest time they've ever experienced. Whilst at the same time Colin has been trying to motivate them to gear up, which is fair enough. It's a take with one, give with the other. I think that's probably the process that we have to go through. It's going to be a fun time next year if it gets accepted. The query, of course, is that they're pushing to get this in for the simple reason that the policy environment in which they're sitting is changing before their very eyes. Carbon is changing. The methods of calculating carbon are changing. The results that we're getting from some of this local junction modelling is calling into question the fact that the project works at all, especially at Alsett Cock and possibly even Manor Way, plus all the details of the local road impacts. So we think we can achieve that more easily during the pre-application period. Once you get into the application period, all control is taken away from you, and PINs do it. I mean, Colin and I have been exchanging information over the weeks, and we would have loved to join in on some of the debate tonight, but felt that it was better that you did it. Tim's answers were all that Councillor Kent said, in our view. Colin?
I think the biggest takeaway from tonight is, in Tim's words, it is, quote, essential that the project gets the scrutiny it needs. And I think we all echo that, and I think on that point we're all in agreement.
It's a shame that the last 4 years hasn't, been sufficient yet.
Thank you, Chris and Colin. That's really useful. Am I right? Correct me if I'm wrong. Interested parties can be an individual, or it could be a scout group or a business.
Indeed, yeah. Any such party, anyone that registers basically as a group, You don't have to be constituted. You can be, you know, a group of you four. Well, you're actually a different group because you're councillors, but you know what I mean. Anyone can join.
Councillor Byrne?
Yeah, the DCO and the next process you've explained, can we have a little like a sheet, like I could give what you've just said to a forum, for example, and I need something to just for them, and for me, really, to if possible.
Yes, of course. Yes, we can. I think we have it somewhere. It's a case of making sure it's fully up to date. When do you need it by? Before submission?
No, the forum meetings are the second Monday of the month, so I've got 3 or 4 weeks for the next one.
That's fine. Yeah, if Lucy can make it an action for me,
thank you.
I can put something together.
Could I suggest via the CVS that gets sent out to all forums in Thurrock, that information?
Once Colin's signed it off and you guys are happy with it, then by all means I'll leave it to Democratic Services to do the honours.
I can liaise with the community development team and I can get it sent out to all the forums if that's something that everyone wants. Yeah.
Thank you, Lucy. Councillor Raper.
Also, perhaps to all councillors. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think the more we can sort of circulate that information, the better. Laura Blake online.
Thank you. I'll be quick, Colin. I saw you put your hand up quick there. I was just going to say that TCAG, Thames Crossing Action Group, we have the process laid out on our website, and we're gearing up to send out newsletters to residents that are signed up to the forums and to councillors. So if anyone finds it helpful, they can have a look on our website as well. Thanks.
Colin Black.
It was just a heads up. Lucy, I think I recall for the paper that went to Cabinet on delegated powers, there was a description of the process was provided then, which set out all of the key decision points. So we can just recirculate that.
Yeah, that's fine. I can take a look, Colin, and get something sent out. Thank you.
Yes, it is in Colin's original paper, which we prepared, and it does set out the key DCO event, what is required and what the deadlines are. But I think you're probably looking for a little bit more than this, I suspect. But we can certainly recirculate this. Yeah.
Any other comments or questions regarding this item? No? Okay. Thank you. Moving on to item 7, health impact assessment verbal update. Any changes from the last time?
Yes. I hesitate, but yes, all the information that we have been asking for, the air quality, the noise assessments, the health impact assessment, that has been refused to be given until we see the DCO in its full form. But what they decided to do was to give us a series 3 so far of DCO briefings. One was on biodiversity, materials and assets. These are topics within the ES. Water, environment, and another one. That was relatively satisfactory. There aren't that many major issues connected with those topics. The second one was on air quality and noise, both the technical side of it and the health elements to it. That was not very satisfactory. We have the presentation that they gave us on that. And I don't know what the process is for circulating. It's quite a large document. Then the third one was about climate. Firstly, first half of that 3-hour briefing was about carbon, and the second half was how it affected health. So we've had those briefings. We haven't got that presentation yet. We've only got the first two. And it must be said, it wasn't entirely clear what the impacts were or the mitigation was in any of it. So whilst there was a briefing, we're a little bit further forward, but not by much. And we certainly don't have any full documents and won't have until DCO submission.
Just to add to what Chris was saying, I think also when we do have the briefings, they tend to evoke more questions from the technical team than they actually answer, because we still don't have the technical detail that we require in order to examine the facts that we're being presented with. So it's rather assumed that we take everything on face value, and our position has always been we wish to have the technical data to review and scrutinise, and we haven't yet got that level of detail.
2 steps forward, 1 step back. Best description I would have thought. Any comments or questions from Councillor Muldowney?
I mean, you know, we've been waiting so long. I guess we are going to have to wait till DCO. But if what you have got can be circulated, obviously we don't expect paper copies of that if they're very large. But if the files can be circulated, that would be great. I will read them. That'll cure my insomnia for a few months. It's disappointing, but it's not surprising given how it's been for the last 4 years. At least, well, something's happened, I guess.
Just to let you know, I don't know, in terms of just technical size, the first briefing of the 4 topics was 3.5 meg, and the one on carbon and health was 5.5, and I don't know what the other one will be.
Yeah.
I mean, I can send it by email. I presume you can take it.
Yeah, the largest document we can send, I think, is 20 megabytes. So I think we can
might be
send that.
Okay.
Yeah, just via email.
Okay, I'll send those round, Colin. Yeah. Great.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
If you've got any questions, obviously, following having a look at those 2, then please.
But this is why I think, you know, I think we'd all agree that there is there is a level of distrust, because what we're being, you know, always what we're being told by National Highways, you know, I just can't imagine if it was all good news. Surely they'd be shouting it from the rooftops, you know, rather than constantly delaying giving us information and or giving us information that doesn't actually answer any of the questions.
It's interesting to note that he's considering his position following the ICO's instruction to release the outline business case. Yes. And I mean, the outline business case cannot be 2 years old. It's got to be more up to date than he indicated. So we'll see.
Any other comments or questions?
The questions we had that we saw before the meeting were really significant, and we didn't actually address all of them. Is it worth sending some questions through and asking for a written response? I mean, I don't know that you'd get one, but
I'm happy to speak with Colin and Chris and see what would be appropriate to send through for a written response. I'm happy to take that up.
I was making a little note against all the questions, and we got through about half. Some more than others.
Yeah, there was quite an interesting one around compensation, non-statutory compensation, which I would imagine, had we asked it this evening, there would have been no answer as such. But there were quite a few, you know.
The current view on compensation is that they'll comply with the National Highways policy, which is essentially the same as statutory compensation. There is no non-statutory. And they say, well, it's not appropriate for a public body to use that sort of money, public money. But that's not the case with other projects.
Laura Blake, online.
Yeah, not really a question. I just wanted to publicly thank Chris and Colin and the whole team that are working on this. I know that there's a hell of a lot going on, so thank you very much for all the time and effort, and please pass our thanks on to all of the team. Thank you.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay, moving on then to the work programme, agenda item 8. Does any member have any further items they'd like added? Looking at what's coming up, it's obviously we're going to keep the health impact assessment on there, because that looks like there is some movement on that for the first time in a long time. Other than that, there's not a great deal, but I suggest there's maybe some things coming back as urgent business considering what we've heard tonight regarding DCO, so we might just leave that as it is unless any member has any suggestions. Laura Blake.
Thank you. Can I just ask the question while we're looking at the work programme? Obviously, last time the DCO went in for submission, there was the call for closing of task force so that Cabinet and such could take over. Do we know, are we going to have another task force meeting? Do we think we'll have a November one? Or what will happen? What will be the procedure this time? Will it be the same as last, or?
Not that I was given much warning when that happened previously. But I hope that task force will continue through the DCO process, because I think it's very important that the scrutiny is there during that process and not just up until when a DCO submitted. Because if we had closed the task force down 2 years ago, and then the DCO obviously was taken away, it's very hard to get this sort of group up and running again. So personally, as chair, I hope that the task force continues to do great work regarding the Lower Thames crossing.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask maybe that we ask whoever it is that does make the decisions to just keep us in the loop this time rather than spring it on us if they do have any plans? Thank you.
I'd hope very much with the new language coming out of the new leader of the council that would be the case. I really hope so. And with that, that concludes the business of this meeting this evening, and I now declare the meeting closed at 8:25. Thank you, everyone, and travel safely.